Welcome to my channel Folktales, where ancient wisdom meets modern hearts. In the shadow of Mount Kilimanjaro, where the baobab trees whispered secrets older than memory, a child's cry pierced the morning air like a spear through silence. But this was no ordinary child. This was Kesi, son of Makena Ochieng, the most powerful CEO in all of East Africa, whose business empire stretched from the golden shores of Mombasa to the copper mines of Katanga. The boy's fever burned hotter than the forge fires of the ironworkers, and his small body convulsed as if possessed by malevolent spirits that even the oldest shamans feared to name. Mac stood at his son's bedside, in the sprawling, medical complex he had built with his own fortune, watching helplessly as machines beeped their mechanical songs of warning. Around him, 100 of the finest doctors from 3 continents moved like worker ants, their white coats rustling with urgency, their faces grave with the weight of failure. Dr. Morrison from London shook his head in defeat. Professor Nakamura from Tokyo packed his instruments with trembling hands. Even the legendary Dr. Makena from Kigali, who had saved presidents and princes, whispered prayers to gods he had long forgotten. The child was dying, and all their knowledge, all their science, all their pride meant nothing against this mysterious illness that consumed the boy. From within, like a hungry hyena devouring its prey, 7 days passed, and still the boy burned with fever, while his father's empire began to crumble like ancient pottery left in the rain. Makena had spent $3 million on specialists, chartered private jets from 4 continents, and built a shrine where he offered gold and cattle to every god his desperate mind could remember from his grandmother's stories. But Kesi grew weaker with each passing hour. His once bright eyes now glazed like those of a fish too long in the market sun. In the bustling Marikiti marketplace, where the air thick with the scent of cardamom and conversations in 7 languages, an old woman named Nairobi sat beneath a torn canvas tent, grinding herbs with a mortar carved from stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. Her weathered hands moved with the rhythm of ancient knowledge as she prepared remedies for the common people, mothers with sick babies, farmers with aching bones, young lovers seeking potions for broken hearts. The wealthy never came to her corner of the market. They preferred their medicine in glass bottles with foreign labels. But Nairobi knew something they did not, that healing comes not from the mind alone, but from the heart that understands suffering, and from hands that have touched both poverty and pain. As she worked, she heard the whispers about the dying prince and the weeping CEO, and her ancient eyes grew thoughtful as storm clouds gathering over the savannah. 20 kilometers away, in the Kibera settlement where corrugated iron roofs caught the morning dew like scattered diamonds, Amara Wanjiku woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 8 years. Her calloused hands, stained with soap and bleach from cleaning the houses of those who would never know her name, trembled as she counted the few shillings that would buy posho and sukuma wiki for her twin daughters, Nima and Baraka. The girls slept soundly on the thin mattress they all shared, their faces peaceful in dreams that poverty could not steal, their small bodies curled together like sleeping kittens, seeking warmth. Amara's story was written in the lines on her face and the strength in her shoulders, abandoned by a man who promised her the world but left her with only memories and 2 hungry mouths to feed. She had worked as a housegirl, a market vendor, a cleaner in the great hotels where tourists paid more for 1 meal than she earned in a month. Yet in her simple wooden box beneath their bed lay something precious beyond measure, bundles of dried herbs, roots, and barks that her grandmother had taught her to use, knowledge passed down through generations of women who had healed with love when medicine failed. Neighbors came to her in the dark of night, when their children burned with fever, when wounds refused to close, when despair threatened to swallow hope. She never asked for payment, only that they believe in the power of compassion, married to ancient wisdom. Today, as she prepared to face another day of endless labor, she could not know that destiny was about to transform her life in ways that even the ancestors could not have foreseen. The newsrooms across Nairobi crackled with electricity as reporters fought for the story that would make careers and break hearts. "Billionaire's son dies despite medical fortune," screamed the headlines that were already being prepared, while social media blazed with speculation about the curse that had befallen the Ochieng dynasty. Makena's business partners whispered among themselves about succession plans and stock prices, their concern for the dying child masked by calculations colder than the morning mist on Lake Victoria. But in the quiet corridors of the medical center, a young nurse named Grace Mathoni couldn't shake the image of the CEO's tears falling like rain on his son's fevered forehead. She had grown up in the slums before her intelligence and determination lifted her to nursing school, and she recognized the particular desperation of a parent watching their child slip away like water through cupped hands. During her break, she found herself thinking of her own grandmother's stories about healers who lived among the people, women whose gifts came not from universities but from the sacred connection between suffering and compassion. Against all protocol, against the warnings of her supervisors who spoke of lawsuits and lost careers, Grace began making phone calls to friends in the settlements, asking about traditional healers, following whispers and rumors like a detective, tracking clues to salvation. The newsrooms across Nairobi crackled with electricity as reporters fought for the story that would make careers and break hearts. "Billionaire's son dies despite medical fortune," screamed the headlines that were already being prepared, while social media blazed with speculation about the curse that had befallen the Ochieng dynasty. Makena's business partners whispered among themselves about succession plans and stock prices, their concern for the dying child masked by calculations colder than the morning mist on Lake Victoria. But in the quiet corridors of the medical center, a young nurse named Grace Mathoni couldn't shake the image of the CEO's tears falling like rain on his son's fevered forehead. She had grown up in the slums before her intelligence and determination lifted her to nursing school, and she recognized the particular desperation of a parent watching their child slip away like water through cupped hands. During her break, she found herself thinking of her own grandmother's stories about healers who lived among the people, women whose gifts came not from universities but from the sacred connection between suffering and compassion. Against all protocol, against the warnings of her supervisors who spoke of lawsuits and lost careers, Grace began making phone calls to friends in the settlements, asking about traditional healers, following whispers and rumors like a detective tracking clues to salvation. Amara's small room fell silent when the knock came at her door, a sound different from the familiar taps of neighbors seeking help in the night. Through the thin wooden door, she sensed something momentous approaching, like the electrical charge that fills the air before lightning strikes. When she opened it to find Makena standing in her doorway, his expensive shoes covered in the red dust of her neighborhood, his eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, she felt the ancestors stirring in her blood like ancient drums awakening. She had seen his face on newspapers that lined the market stalls, heard his name spoken with awe and resentment in equal measure. But now she saw something that no camera had ever captured: her father broken by helplessness, stripped of everything that money could buy except the one thing it could never purchase, his child's life. Without speaking, she stepped aside and let him enter her world of patched walls and concrete floors, where dignity dwelt in cleanliness and pride lived in the careful arrangement of their few possessions. Her daughters stirred in their sleep, sensing the presence of a stranger, but Amara's hand on their backs soothed them back to dreams, while her ancient soul recognized the test that the universe had placed before her. This man, who could buy her settlement 100 times over, was about to learn that the greatest treasures could not be purchased with gold, but only earned through the courage to trust in love's power to heal what knowledge could not touch. "My son is dying," Makena whispered, and in those 4 words, Amara heard the echo of every mother's worst nightmare. The sound that cut across all boundaries of class and color and creed. She listened as he described the symptoms with the precision of a man accustomed to controlling details. But she heard beneath his words the melody of desperation that sang the same song whether it came from a penthouse or a shack. When he finished speaking, the silence stretched between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed, and Amara felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders, like a cloak woven from starlight and responsibility. "Bring him here," she said simply, and Makena's face transformed with an expression caught between hope and terror. "But understand this, Boina healing is not a transaction. It cannot be bought with your money or commanded with your power. It requires something more precious than gold. It requires faith, and it requires you to trust a poor woman from Kibera with the life of your most precious treasure." She moved to her wooden box and began selecting herbs with the certainty of a conductor choosing instruments for a symphony. Each root and leaf chosen not just for its properties but for its place in the ancient dance of healing that her grandmothers had taught her. "If you bring your son to me, you must come not as a CEO, but as a father, not as a rich man, but as a human being who understands that we are all equal in the face of life and death." The journey back to the medical center felt like traveling between two worlds, and Makena found himself changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. He had always believed that problems could be solved with enough money, enough connections, enough force of will applied in the right directions. But Amara's quiet confidence had shaken something loose in his soul, a recognition that true power might flow in directions his business. School professors had never mentioned in their lectures about market dominance and competitive advantage against the protests of the medical team and the horror of his business associates. Makena made arrangements to transport his son to Kibera. Dr. Morrison threatened to report him to authorities, warning of malpractice lawsuits and public scandals that would destroy his reputation. His board of directors held emergency meetings, whispering about mental breakdowns and succession plans. But as Makena looked at his son's pale face, at the machines that beeped their mechanical prayers over a body that grew weaker by the hour, he realized that reputation meant nothing if it was built on the grave of his child. For the first time in his adult life, the great CEO found himself choosing love over logic, hope over strategy, and the wisdom of the poor over the knowledge of the rich. The transformation had begun, though he didn't yet understand that saving his son would require him to discover who he truly was beneath the layers of success and ambition that had defined his existence. Word traveled through Kibera faster than wildfire in dry grass. The rich man was bringing his dying son to Amara, the healer who lived among them, but whose gifts seemed to come from realms beyond the visible world. Neighbors emerged from their homes like flowers opening to unexpected rain, creating a circle of protection and witness around the small room where miracles might soon unfold. Old women who remembered the healing songs brought water blessed by moonlight, while young mothers offered prayers in languages that predated the arrival of missionaries and their foreign gods. Mama, whose own grandchild Amara had saved from pneumonia, swept the narrow pathways clean and hung white cloths from the doorways, transforming the settlement into a sacred space worthy of the drama about to unfold. Children who usually played with bottle caps and stones stood quietly in doorways, sensing that they were about to witness something that would become legend, a story they would tell their own grandchildren about the night the powerful came seeking wisdom from the powerless. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation and ancient energy, as if the ancestors were drawing close to witness this collision between two worlds, this test of whether money could learn humility and whether love could triumph over the arrogance of modern medicine. The stage was set for a healing that would transform not just a dying boy, but the understanding of power itself. The ambulance looked absurdly out of place in the narrow lanes of Kibera, its flashing lights painting the corrugated walls in alternating waves of red and blue like some technological aurora borealis. Makena carried his son in his arms, the boy's body so light it felt like holding a bird with broken wings, and as he walked through the gathered crowd, he felt their eyes upon him not with the familiar mixture of envy and respect he was accustomed to, but with something deeper, the recognition of shared humanity in the face of suffering. Amara met them at her doorway, her presence radiating a calm that seemed to slow time itself. She had prepared her space with the care of a priestess, arranging a temple candles flickered in corners, filling the small room with dancing shadows, while bundles of sage and sweetgrass sent spirals of cleansing smoke toward the ceiling. The medical team that had followed the ambulance stood awkwardly at the edges of the scene, their modern equipment and clinical certainty seeming suddenly inadequate in this space where older truths held sway. Dr. Morrison muttered about liability and malpractice, while Professor Nakamura found himself remembering his own grandmother's healing rituals, knowledge he had abandoned in his pursuit of Western medical degrees. But Amara paid no attention to their discomfort. Her focus was entirely on the small, burning body that Makena placed gently on the clean mat she had prepared, and on the father whose trust would be as crucial to the healing as any herb or prayer. Amara's hands moved over Kesi's body like a blind woman reading sacred text, not touching but sensing the patterns of illness that ran deeper than any machine could measure. She had learned this art from her grandmother, who had learned it from hers, in an unbroken chain of women who understood that sickness was often a disconnection from community, from purpose, from the natural rhythms that governed all life. As she worked, she began to hum a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself, a sound that made the watching crowd sway unconsciously and brought tears to eyes that had forgotten how to weep for beauty. The herbs she had chosen told their own story. Bitter root from the highland forests to draw out the poison of isolation, sweet leaves from the river valleys to restore the connection between body and spirit, bark from the ancient baobab to ground the child in the strength of his ancestors. She mixed these elements in a bowl carved from wood that had grown in soil blessed by centuries of rainfall, adding water drawn from the sacred spring where her great-grandmother had once danced for rain. But the most important ingredient was invisible, the love that flowed from her heart, seasoned by her own experience of suffering and loss, purified by years of serving others who had nothing to offer in return except their trust. As she worked, Makena found himself remembering his own grandmother's stories about healers who could see beyond the visible world, and for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to believe in mysteries that spreadsheets could not contain. The mixture Amara prepared was dark as river mud and aromatic with the secrets of the forest, and as she lifted the bowl to Kesi's lips, the entire room seemed to hold its breath like the moment before dawn when night surrenders to day. The boy's fever-cracked lips parted, and drop by drop, the ancient medicine entered his system while the assembled crowd prayed in a dozen languages, and the medical team watched with the fascination of scientists witnessing the impossible. But Amara was not done. She placed her hands on Kesi's burning forehead and began to speak words that predated the written language, calling on the spirits of healing to recognize this child as one of their own, asking the ancestors to guide his young soul back from whatever dark territory his illness had carried him toward. Her voice grew stronger with each word, filled with the authority of generations of women who had stood between their communities and despair. And even Dr. Morrison found himself silenced by the power that radiated from this uneducated woman, who possessed knowledge that his medical school had never taught. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, as if a window had been opened to let in air from another dimension, and Makena felt something breaking loose in his chest, not just hope, but recognition that he was witnessing something that would change his understanding of the world forever. The child's breathing, which had been shallow and labored, began to deepen, and across his fevered face, the first hint of natural color began to return like sunrise painting the eastern sky. As the first drops of the ancient remedy touched Kesi's lips, something extraordinary began to happen. The electronic monitors that had been beeping their warnings for days suddenly shifted rhythm, and the medical team watched in stunned silence as the child's vital signs began to stabilize for the first time in a week. Dr. Morrison grabbed his colleague's arm, his voice barely a whisper. "This is impossible." But even as he spoke, the evidence was undeniable. The boy's fever was breaking, his breathing was deepening, and the deathly pallor that had marked his face was giving way to the healthy flush of returning life. Amara continued her work with the steady rhythm of one who had always known this moment would come, her hands moving over Kesi's small body as she guided the healing energy to places where modern medicine had failed to reach. The watching crowd began to sway and hum, their voices joining her ancient song in harmonies that seemed to arise spontaneously from the collective soul of the community. Makena knelt beside his son's mat, tears streaming down his face as he watched color return to the child's cheeks like paint being restored to a faded painting. For the first time in days, Kesi's eyes fluttered open, clear and bright, and when he saw his father's face, he smiled a simple expression that carried more power than all the CEO's business contracts and more value than all his accumulated wealth. In that smile, Makena saw not just his son's recovery, but a glimpse of the man he himself might become if he could learn to measure success by different standards. In the days that followed, as Kesi's strength returned like a river flowing back into its banks after drought, Makena found himself unable to leave Kibera. He who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated with presidents now sat cross-legged on a woven mat in Amara's small room, learning about herbs and healing while his business empire managed itself through video calls and emergency meetings. His expensive suits hung unused in his Nairobi penthouse while he wore simple clothes that allowed him to move freely through the narrow paths of the settlement. And for the first time in years, he slept deeply, untroubled by the anxiety that had driven him to success at the cost of his soul. Amara watched this transformation with the knowing eyes of one who understood that healing comes in many forms. She had saved the child's body, but she recognized that the father's spirit needed tending as well. As they worked together, she teaching him the properties of different plants, he sharing stories of the business world that seemed increasingly remote and unimportant, a bond formed between them that transcended the vast differences in their circumstances. It was built on the foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect, seasoned with the miracle they had witnessed together. and strengthened by the growing realization that they each possessed something the other needed for wholeness. Makena's wealth could provide security and opportunity, while Amara's wisdom could offer meaning and connection to truths deeper than profit margins. Neither spoke of love in those early days, but it grew between them like a plant taking root in fertile soil, quiet and natural and inevitable as the sunrise that painted their shared mornings with gold. 3 months later, the business magazines struggled to explain the transformation of Makena Ochieng, the billionaire who had shocked Kenya by establishing free medical clinics throughout Nairobi's slums and funding traditional healing research at the university level. His board of directors had been skeptical until they saw the profits generated by his new approach. Communities, grateful for genuine care, became loyal customers, and his reputation as a leader who understood both innovation and tradition attracted investments from around the world. But the numbers on quarterly reports could not capture the real story. The way Makena's eyes lit up when he talked about sustainable development projects that honored indigenous knowledge, or how his laughter had returned, rich and genuine, when he played with his son in the courtyards of Kibera. Amara, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a healing revolution that bridged the gap between ancient wisdom and modern medicine. The modest clinic that Makena had built around her traditional practice became a model for healthcare integration, drawing researchers and patients from across Africa and beyond. She maintained her simple lifestyle, still living in her small room in Kibera. But now her work reached thousands who had been forgotten by conventional medicine. Her daughters, Nima and Baraka, flourished in the school that Makena had quietly funded, their bright minds absorbing education while their hearts remained rooted in the wisdom their mother had taught them. The love that had grown between Amara and Makena deepened like roots finding water in drought, and when they married in a ceremony that brought together her community and his world, the celebration lasted 3 days and was attended by both street vendors and government ministers, proving that joy recognizes no boundaries when hearts are truly united. The wedding itself was a testament to the power of two worlds becoming one. Under the sprawling branches of an ancient baobab tree that had witnessed centuries of joy and sorrow, Amara and Makena exchanged vows that were spoken in Kiswahili, English, and the ancient tongue of her grandmothers. She wore a dress of traditional kanga cloth that had been blessed by the women of Kibera, while he had abandoned his expensive suits for the simple white robes that signified his rebirth as a man who understood that true wealth lay in love and service to others. When the ceremony concluded and the drumbeats echoed across the settlement, even the skeptical journalists who had come to document this unlikely union found themselves moved to tears by the authenticity of the moment. Years passed, like seasons flowing into one another, each bringing new chapters to their extraordinary story. Kesi grew into a strong young man who spoke fluent Kiswahili and could prepare traditional remedies alongside his stepmother, his childhood miracle having instilled in him a deep appreciation for both modern science and ancient wisdom. He often said that having two mothers, the birth mother who had died when he was too young to remember, and Amara who had saved his life, made him twice as blessed. The clinic they had built together expanded into a network of healing centers across Kenya, each one training local healers while incorporating the best of modern medical knowledge, creating a new model of healthcare that respected both innovation and tradition. On their wedding day, as the sun set over the sprawling expanse of Nairobi and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kesi, now healthy and strong, stood between his father and his new stepmother, his face glowing with the happiness of a child who had witnessed miracles and learned that love was the greatest medicine of all. The old oracle from the marketplace, Neo, blessed their union with words that would echo through generations. When the powerful humbled themselves before the powerless, when the rich learn from the poor, when modern wisdom bows to ancient knowledge, that is when healing truly begins, not just for one child, but for a whole world that has forgotten the power of love to transform everything it touches. And in the years that followed, their story became legend, whispered in markets and boardrooms alike, a reminder that the greatest treasures cannot be bought or sold, only discovered in the courage to trust, to love, and to believe in miracles that money cannot create but hearts united in purpose can surely manifest. As the storytellers say, when the fire burns low and the last tale has been told, some stories end, but the greatest ones live forever in the hearts of those who believe that love can indeed conquer all. That wisdom flows from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the poorest among us hold the richest treasures. And so ends our tale of the healer's heart, where a dying prince found life, A proud CEO found humility, and a poor single mother discovered that her greatest wealth had always been the love in her healing hands. If you enjoyed this powerful tale of love, healing, and transformation, then please like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones. Tell us in the comments section where you are watching from. We love connecting with our global family who appreciates the timeless wisdom of African folktales. Your support helps keep these beautiful stories alive for future generations.